The NFL is getting hit on both sides these days over its latest response to the Black Lives Matter movement. On Friday, Commissioner Roger Goodell released this video admitting the league made mistakes in how it's handled players protesting police brutality and racism in recent years.
We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter.
And while Goodell didn't specifically say anything about the national anthem or players taking a knee, that did not stop Donald Trump from taking aim. Tweeting late last night, could it be even remotely possible that in Roger Goodell's rather interesting statement of peace and reconciliation, he was intimating that it would now be okay for the players to kneel or not to stand for the national anthem, thereby disrespecting our country and our flag. Goodell also said in the video that he'd been reaching out to players who've spoken out about racial injustices in recent years, but notably never mentioned Colin Kaepernick, who most believe was drummed out of the league because of his activism against police brutality and racial oppression. Without any action there, the NFL's apology rings hollow, argues ESPN senior writer Howard Bryant, who writes, if the league expects the public to believe their statements, the next step toward real truth is opening the door to signing Kaepernick. Howard Bryant joins me now. Is also a sports commentator for NPR Weekend Edition, former reporter for the Washington Post and the Boston Herald, and the author of Full Dissidence, Notes from an Uneven Playing Field. Howard, good to see you as always. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Jim. I apologize. I'm underdressed for you today.
I think you're dressed just beautifully, actually, Howard. I wish I was. So, Howard, in your piece for ESPN, you say the league has to answer the question, is this a reckoning or a dance? I know how they'd answer it, and I also know how you'd answer it. Why is it just a dance? Simply because he chose not to mention those two words, Colin and Kaepernick?
Well, I think it's a dance because not just that he didn't mention Colin Kaepernick, but because Colin Kaepernick is unemployed. It's a vindication. How can you say that Black Lives Matter? How can you say that we were wrong? How can you say all of these things? And the guy that you used as a symbol to blackball is still unemployed. There's another piece of this, too, where I look at it and say the rules that are still prohibiting players from protesting and that are further restricting the players, they're still in place. I didn't hear Goodell come out and say that they were lifting those, nor have I seen any owner come forward and say, Colin Kaepernick is welcome to play in this league. To me, Jim, it's like giving a guy a death sentence, realizing the DNA exonerates him, and then keeping him on death row.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I've only watched the Goodell thing once, but he doesn't mention police brutality either, does he, or does he?
He mentions police, and he mentions the condolences to the families who were affected by, but he didn't say that they condemn and work toward a solution. So there's a lot of hedging going on.
So is it fair to assume that this only happened because the day before a bunch of really prominent African-American players did their own 70-second thing in which they said the NFL has got to step up to the plate. They got to condemn racism, on and on like this. This is purely a response to these players, sort of a CYA kind of thing, is it not, or am I being unfair?
No, well, it's always a response, and that's one of the reasons why the NFL has very little credibility on this issue. And it's because it's a response. They actually read that. They read that statement. Goodell's statement was almost verbatim to what the players were demanding. I mean, I think the thing that gets me about it, Jim, more than anything else, is that there's no corporation in America that made its claim about Colin Kaepernick or about kneeling more clear than the NFL. How do they stand on this in this space now?
Well, you know, Howard, it's interesting you mentioned that the words that Goodell used are almost exactly the same words that were demanded of him by the players. I think there were 9 players, however many players there were in that video. I wanted to broach that with you. Is they said that they want the NFL to condemn racism and systematic oppression of black people. They didn't mention their former colleague either. Did they get a pass for that? I don't think so. Should they?
No, they don't get a pass for that, and that's the other piece of this. when I talk about this, I say let's not forget that this was a complete, absolute destruction of Colin Kaepernick's career, including the players agreeing to go into business with the owners on the Players Coalition, that they decided that it was okay to move on without Colin Kaepernick too. So both sides, whether it's the Players Association, the players, and the owners, they all decided it was time to move on from Colin.
How much does this matter? And I don't mean as an individual matter of justice for Kaepernick, without whom a lot of this might not be happening, but in a grander sense, stepping back, it seems to me that the NFL admitting and attempting to atone for their sins around Kaepernick is part of a larger solution, not just an intra-NFL solution. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, and I think that one of the things that struck me was that I think the NFL may be recognizing that the steam is out of Donald Trump's kettle as well, that they're not afraid of him anymore, and that they don't feel that there's going to be a great price to pay in crossing him. We saw Drew Brees already sort of come out and come out against Donald Trump's statement, and so I think maybe they're recognizing that his peak has already passed.
Is there a second act for Goodell here, or would the owners not let him make a second statement, assuming pressure builds to say something about Kaepernick?
I think there's definitely a second act for him because, one, the league is full of second chances for somebody who's the commissioner. But also, I think there is because I think he wants to be the guy who is going to end his commissionership because his time is coming to an end. He's only going to be there for a couple more years, I believe. He doesn't want this to be part of his legacy. He doesn't want it to be the thing that people remember him by.
You know, Howard, if we can step back from the NFL for a second, you've lived through a lot of George Floyd's. We all have. And it seems to me, as a white person, that this is different. The response is different from what it's been before. If you agree with that, first of all, do you agree with that? And if you do, why is it different this time?
Well, I do agree with it, and I think there are a few important reasons. Number one, I think that people have been in the house for a long time, for about 90 days so far, and I think there's a lot of energy there. I think it's the perfect storm. I think you take 3.5 years of this White House. I think people are tired, and it's an election year as well. But I think there's also something else, too, and that is if you were 18 years old in 2008 and that was your first election, you're 30 years old now. And that moment meant something to you in terms of being free. And now you're seeing a betrayal. Look at all these white kids who are out there in the front. They believe in this. They believed in that day in Grant Park, and they believed in this sort of post-racial thing. And now they see us going backwards. And I think the other part of it, too, is when you have corrections officers on the streets pointing weapons at American citizens, and you have police unleashed, and you have the military pointing weapons at American citizens, that's a tipping point. And that's something that you look at, and it's not something that you say, oh, this is just like everything else. Something's different here.
I hope you're right. Howard, it's great to talk to you. Wonderful piece, as always.
Thank you, Jim. My pleasure. It's good to see you again.